Hello and welcome to Spotlight. U.S. President Joe Biden is under fire for restoring a controversial immigration program his predecessor Donald Trump launched to stem the flow of migrants at the Mexico border. The program requires migrants to wait in Mexico sometimes for months while their claims are processed in the U.S. Biden suspended the program after taking office in January this year, but now he has to restore it beginning from next week following a federal court judge's order back in August. The Biden administration has even taken into account the humanitarian concerns raised by Mexico, but still he's facing criticism. Rights groups say restoring the program would spur violence in border camps, and the UN Refugee Agency also says the move puts asylum seekers at risk. Some lawmakers from Biden's Democratic Party have urged him to fight the order in court. Joining us right now is our correspondent, Colin Camp, who's with us from Washington. Colin, tell us more about the re-implementation of this Remain in Mexico policy.
Yeah, after reaching a deal with Mexico, this policy will start to take place within the next few days. But what the Biden administration says is different from the previous administration, is that those seeking asylum and that have to remain in Mexico will have their situation resolved within 6 months instead of an undetermined amount of time that they were facing during the Trump administration, where people were seeking asylum, had to return to Mexico, and then were held there without really any information on how long they would be there. The Biden administration says that it wants to work expeditiously with different individuals and families and pair them with counselors, with attorneys, so that their situation can be ameliorated as quickly as possible. Now, this was something that came to terms with Mexico after a deal was reached because of the amount of people wanting to seek asylum in the U.S. coming through Mexico, but not having the legal resources, nor sometimes the physical resources to support them. So this new deal was reached, and of course there's a lot of controversy because of the fact that they're returning people back to Mexico when their original destination was the United States.
All right, thanks a lot, Colin. That was Press TV's Colin Campbell joining us from Washington. But joining us on tonight's edition of the Spotlight, we have columnist at Black Agenda Report, Margaret Kimberley, who's with us from New York, and also international lawyer and human rights expert John Philpot, joining us from Montreal. So starting off with Mr. Philpot in Montreal. Sir, talk to us about the re-implementation of this Remain in Mexico policy and basically some issues that our correspondent was mentioning a little earlier about any differences that there will be from the Trump-era version of it.
Well, I've had the experience in Canada of people being required to make their claims from outside the country, and it creates a big imbalance in the process because the person's not in the country, and as our journalist pointed out, they're going to send some people back to Mexico to determine this policy, So it's an unequal and unfair system to have your status determined from outside the country. And we all know also that your U.S. jurisdiction for refugee status is extremely difficult. And so I think it's very, very unfair. And many people in the States and in Canada kind of like to think, oh, well, Biden's great and Trump's a devil. But in fact, they're kind of the same thing. And I've seen on almost every other issue that Biden is not much better than Trump. And so this is extremely worrying. And we got to remember that in Latin America, and we can look at Honduras until 2 days ago or 3 days ago, and countries like Colombia and Ecuador, those countries produce refugees, which are legitimate political refugees who need help, and they should be welcomed in the U.S. and dealt with by law. And so I find it very worrying, and it's a way for the U.S. to avoid its obligations under the refugee treaty, which was signed some 60 years almost 70 years ago. And so I think it's
Right.
really a big mistake.
Let's bring in Ms. Kimberley from New York on the discussion. Ms. Kimberley, Biden called out Trump during the presidential debates, blasting him for being the first president ever to make people seek asylum in another country. Well, Joe Biden is number 2 on that list now.
Yes, he is. It's one more example of how Trump foreign policy has become Biden's foreign policy. As the other guest pointed out, people cannot adequately apply for asylum if they aren't in the country they're trying to enter. The system is deliberately made difficult for people to navigate. And if you're not even in the United States, it's almost impossible to really have an application that has a chance of being accepted. And most asylum applications are rejected, in fact. So people have legitimate claims in Central Americans, Haitians, people are using the border to come from literally all over the world, not just this hemisphere. And often because of U.S. policies, their countries are just unlivable. Haiti, for example, all of its problems are caused by the United States. Honduras just had an election, but the U.S. overthrew a government when Obama was president, another Democrat, and there was a great deal of violence and danger for people there. So they have a legitimate reason to apply.
That's right, Mr. Philpot. The Biden administration, well, basically they're saying the policy is being imposed again, not because they want to, but because they have to. Critics, on the other hand, are saying that the administration is actually welcoming it to bring down migrant numbers, which are at a 21-year high in July. Do you agree with that notion?
I don't agree that they have to, because any legislative authority can go beyond a legal decision out of the principle of legislative sovereignty. So they are not forced to do it. They can change the laws and allow these immigrants, these refugees, to enter the country. That is a nonsense argument. And as Margaret Kimberley pointed out, and as you pointed out, there's a growing flow of refugees, and this is a test to the gravity and inequality of our neoliberal imperial economic system and growing U.S. Monroe Doctrine style intervention in Latin America, where if a country steps out of line, they apply sanctions, and they force other countries to stay in line and support repressive governments, leaving these people, and I don't know how many there are, hundreds of thousands, in limbo and trying to escape their governments, escape their situations, and obtain status in the United States. Ironically, of course, the United States probably needs immigrants still, but maybe they don't want as many people whose color is not absolutely purely white. I'm not sure about that, but that would seem like a logical conclusion.
Ms. Kimberley, the policy, in the words of the Biden administration, have been revamped to address humanitarian concerns. The Department of Homeland Security, to be specific, says the changes will include certain, quote, certain humanitarian improvements. Now, all kinds of terrible things are happening to these people who are waiting for their asylum requests to be processed in in Mexico, a country that is not their own, most likely, most of those migrants. How can that change? Logistically, is that even possible to improve the humanitarian situation and conditions for them?
Well, it could change if there is an acceptance of the reality that there are so many people who want to leave their homelands. And the first change is for the United States to not be the cause of their problems. People don't want to be in a caravan for weeks to come here unless they're very desperate. So the first issue is the United States not being part of their problem, which is a heavy lift because these are the imperatives of imperialism. But so there has to be a recognition of the U.S. role. There has to be a recognition that this is something that's not just going away. It's a political issue, a difficult political issue to navigate. Most people in the country do not want people to seek asylum on the border and have very negative opinions about it, but it is a reality. And this administration, which is supposed to be so much better than Trump, but which has already deported more Haitians than the Trump administration did, it's time for them to put up or shut up and put the mechanisms in place to make sure that this process can be handled in a humane way that respects international law.
Mr. Philpot, humanitarian organizations are saying the U.S. is basically rejecting people to danger and death, and now they want to give a gentler version of an already deadly policy. Unpack that for us.
Well, I think that stresses the fact that the Biden administration is little different than the Trump administration. They put a few more sugar on their words, but the mistreatment and buffeting and throwing around of these people who are streaming into the U.S. is carried out pretty much the same way. And those criticisms are valid, and the U.S. has to change its approach. And we're talking about more deeper issues with respect to the U.S. and its policy, its foreign policy. And we can easily get into the concept of multilateralism, ending intervention, ending Monroe Doctrine, ending interfering in the elections in foreign countries and other countries. But I guess this may go beyond the scope of today's discussion.
Right, Ms. Kimberley, let's talk about what put a halt to the policy in the first place and how it was ordered to be reinstated by the Supreme Court. What's the basis of this ruling?
Well, the basis of the ruling is that this is U.S. law. This is the way it was always done. Trump is the one who made the change, but this is what U.S. policy ought to be. I'm not certain that the Biden administration is not opposed to it. I think they probably breathe a sigh of relief because they get to say, well, we wanted to be different than Trump, but you know, this court ruling says that we have to do what Trump did. It's not really what we want to do, but that's a phony assertion. They have the same policies on immigration as past presidents, unless we forget Obama was the deporter-in-chief, deporting more people than all of his predecessors. Trump, as horrible as he was supposed to be, and he was horrible in many ways, and despite his rhetoric, deported fewer people in his one term than Obama did in his first. So it's important that this rule, I hope that it does stand. And it forces the Biden administration to be honest and not pretend, as they did with campaign rhetoric, that they're going to be more humane when that's actually not what they intend to do.
Ms. Kimberley, I'm going to stay with you for this one. Why would Mexico agree to this? Those people, they're not Mexican citizens. They're coming from Central America, from South America. What is Mexico's position on this?
Well, I think that Mexico's in a difficult position. I'm sure there's pressure on them including from perhaps their own population. This is creates difficulty for them. But Mexico has all sorts of relations with the United States. So it's unclear why they are going along with this policy of people having to stay in their country in order to apply for asylum, when they would prefer that this not be true. So that's some information we should be on the lookout for.
Sure. Mr. Philpot, would you like to talk to us about Mexico's position on the issue?
Well, I think Margaret Kimberley has hit it. It's not Mexico's decision. It's Mexico saying, I think, what can we do?
Right.
And Mexico wants to be sovereign. It's historically attempted to be sovereign. It's acting in a sovereign manner in many of its international relations with Cuba, breaking the U.S. blockade on Cuba, recognizing the Maduro government. So it's acting as a fairly independent country and maturing politically. From I as an outsider, I'm not Mexican in many ways, but I think they're kind of like stuck with this. That's my reading, and Ms. Kimberley may clarify this a bit more. I don't know.
Would you like to clarify that more?
I think saying stuck is it's a short and sweet answer, but I think it does sum it up. Yes.
All right, let's look at this in the bigger picture. Mr. Philpot, is this, in your opinion, hypocritical of countries like the United States, who are self-proclaimed champions of human rights, not allowing asylum seekers their due process?
Well, this idea that the U.S. champions human rights, we could have another 2-hour interview on that. That's tongue-in-cheek, of course.
I can set that up if you want.
No, I'm not an expert in the U.S., but they have so many people in prison on a racial basis, so many people with long sentences. It's probably one of the most retrograde countries with respect to human rights. And human rights includes social and economic rights, voting rights. The voting rights in the U.S. are terrible. The social economic rights of American citizens are terrible. The right to life, it's one of the most backward countries with 800,000 dead? China has 5,000 or so. And everyone says, well, maybe we don't believe China. I'm sorry. We have to take that seriously. So I couldn't even embark with the idea that the U.S. is a champion of human rights. It's only a champion of human rights if it can intervene in a foreign election or in a foreign country and try and overthrow the government. And I'm not exaggerating.
Ms. Kimberley, your thoughts on the issue, on the same question?
Oh, sure. Well, yes, the U.S. is the world's biggest jailer. More people in prison than any other country. A bigger percentage of its population in prison than any other country. The largest military budget, which is inherently undemocratic. 800 bases all over the world, which by definition deprive people, governments and their people of their sovereign rights. Yes, more than 800,000 deaths from COVID-19. And at the same time, our neoliberal austerities closing hospitals, no free health care. Some COVID treatments were free, but now they've announced no more free rides. You have to pay, and hopefully your horrible insurance company, if you have insurance at all, will pay your bills. Police killings. By any standard, Americans are not doing well in a variety of ways, and our country does not respect human rights, but will claim that it is destroying another country on the basis of protecting human rights somewhere else. This responsibility to protect, which was a scam ginned up to justify the U.S. Bombing and droning and invading and interfering in targeted nations. And to put it to add insult to injury, Biden is having this democracy summit next week, and they've decided who's a democracy, which country is a democracy and which isn't. And any country the U.S. doesn't like, they've declared is not democratic, even when some of those countries are in fact more democratic than ours.
And Mr. Philpot, similar events are taking place in Europe as well. Let's not forget that part of the Atlantic. Why are these countries not offering the asylum seekers their rights, not allowing them their due process?
Well, the issue of immigration is not the only issue, because we see why people are fleeing. And the particular one which sticks in my mind is the Syrians who flooded into Europe.
Sure.
But the country was destroyed by the US and the US proxies. And now Europeans don't want Syrians to return. They want to return. And these are things, this is a very big subject, which I hesitate to generalize about because, we don't want people to be political or economic refugees to flee into our countries, although they're welcome as far as I'm concerned. The ideal world would be that the countries which are poorer and under US control or with dictatorships, they should evolve. But that's another question which, again, goes beyond our discussions now. And Europe, we look at the question of people crossing from North Africa in boats. Well, if they hadn't bombed Libya, it wouldn't be as bad. If they didn't have slave markets in Libya since the U.S. bombed Canada. I'm from Canada. Europe bombed Libya. We would have a different situation. And the Africans working in Libya were working in Libya because they had good jobs. That's my understanding of it. I'm not an expert.
All right, and your final thoughts on the issue, Ms. Kimberley?
Well, yes, I would just like to add on to what Mr. Philpot has said. The United States and its allies are directly responsible for this refugee crisis in Europe. The United States and NATO destroying Libya 10 years ago, attempting to destroy Syria, crippling sanctions against Syria, which have made life miserable for people. Of course, people are trying to get to Europe, but there is no acknowledgement of the role they played in this crisis. So Britain and France arguing back and forth about who's at fault. I remember the Prime Minister of the UK and the President of France directly going to Libya it was really sickening to me that they personally went there to dance on Gaddafi's grave, so to speak. And now neither of those countries will acknowledge the role that it played in creating this refugee crisis.
All right, that's all the time we have for tonight's program. Allow me to thank my guests, columnist at the Black Agenda Report, Margaret Kimberley, joining us from New York. Also, thanks to international lawyer and human rights expert John Philpot, speaking to us from Montreal. And a special thanks to your viewers for staying with us on tonight's edition of Spotlight. It's good night for now and see you next time.